what I want to talk about is what we've learned. When you look at your job description, from the time you get ready to launch, church grows, you always are wanting to see what part of my job description never changes and what part of my job description changes as the church grows, evolves, maturates, and we gain staff and all those kind of things. And in my humble but accurate opinion, that's what I tell my son, my humble but accurate opinion, there are a couple things you never give up. Number one, you are the chief vision caster for your organizations. You cannot give the baton of relationship and give the baton of vision casting. That is something that you have. You have others as your church grows. If you've got 200 people on your staff, then they echo a vision, but there is a singular vision that starts. And so you're the chief vision caster. And that, how do you do that? What rooms do you do that in? That's imperative. How you raise money is how effectively you connect people to your vision. It is not about how you ask for money. If you think it's about how you ask for money, then go join Amway. You know, go build a multi-level, go sell vacuum cleaners door to door, do insurance. Those are all good ways to make money, and they teach you how to ask. But in the church world, you are a nonprofit. You're a 501c3 nonprofit, but you're a different kind. And so it's not a matter of, hey, I'm going to run everybody in my zip code through Wealth Engine. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Wealth Engine. Wealth Engine is a superb collection of databases that every nonprofit in the world uses. I've used it for my nonprofit folks, but church is different. And in Wealth Engine, I could take Phil Ling, Jonesboro, Tennessee, East Tennessee, run me through, and you could find out what boards I sit on, what I own, what boats, airplanes, real estate, stocks. You could find so much about me so that you could sit down intelligently across the table when you wanted money for your hospital and say, hey, Phil, we really need you for $500,000. That's Wealth Engine. It's effective, but in the church world, it would probably bite you in the butt. I would say something other than butt, but I don't know you that well. So it would bite you in the butt more than it would help you. In the church world, it's not how effectively you ask. You do have to challenge people, but it's not how effectively you ask. You don't slide pieces of paper across the table with numbers written on them and say, hey, Bob, man, I'm really needing you for that. Because in that world, as soon as you slide the paper, you're not supposed to talk. And you're supposed to sit there awkwardly because the first one to talk loses. That's fundraising. And most pastors don't raise their hand and say, dude, man, I love to do that. That'd be so cool. No, the guys that enjoy that part of it are in jail. So you don't want to be that dude. But you do have to raise money. So you're the chief vision caster. That doesn't go away. You never give up that your role is leading leaders. So part of the vision casting and part of the fundraising is leading leaders. So I simply believe, so you understand philosophically where I come from. You can disagree with me and be wrong. That's okay. But where I come from is how well I describe my vision, how crystal clear I am with my vision, and how well I attach my leaders to my vision dictates how successful I am. So if you're a church of 20,000 people, well, you can't sit down and have coffee with all 20,000. So you're going to have to interact with leaders and leaders of leaders. And that's how you build a system. So one of the things that I did several years ago, I got frustrated at the beginning where I would sit down with the church and try to help with pastor and church leadership. And one of the early questions, I'll be on a plane tomorrow morning, go to Dallas, Texas. I'm going to sit with this church, and I guarantee one of the questions they have is how much money can we raise? So when you start off to raise money, whether it's the launch or after launch, how much money can I raise? What's realistic? The cost of your project has nothing to do with how much money you can raise. So if you say I need $500,000 or $1 million, your ability to raise did not double because you doubled how much money you need. That's just the cost of the project. It is what it is. So your ability to raise $1 million is going to be predicated on what's my fishing pool look like, what the audiences that I can communicate look like. That's what it is. So in those early days, when I would sit with the church, they say, how much can we raise? You know, it's like, hey, I can tell you averages. You know, I've worked literally, and I'm not making this stuff up, little churches, big churches. I've worked with 500 churches, raised $1 billion. Some of them big ones you've heard of, most of them you've never heard of. Well, I can tell you what the average is, but what's that got to do with anything? I can tell you the average church your size, you know, what they did. But if you're in Greenwich, Connecticut, or in Brownsville, Texas. Those are two very different communities that maybe have churches that are same size. So how do I do it? So I hired a really smart guy named Mark that had a degree in statistics. And we analyzed 4,000 churches from 30 different denominational backgrounds that had raised money in projects. So they had specific projects, they raised money for it. And then we did what I call the blameless autopsy. All right, so what can we learn? And so tomorrow when I sit down with this church in Dallas, I've already done their analysis, or I take credit for that. A guy named Tim that works with me did the analysis. And I will sit and walk them through and say, hey, I don't know you, but let me tell you what you look like on paper based on your last 2 or 3 years of giving. Number of giving units, at what level do they give? How many units do you lose in a year? How many do you gain? At what level do they come in when they start? How long does it take from the time I start attending your church to I start giving? All that. And coming out with a realistic, scary, accurate potential. So what you're trying to figure out on that, on the front end, is what's capacity for that church look like? So what's capacity? And I've been with too many churches and too many guys that'll say, Phil, I think, you know, we were talking about raising $250,000, but I'm really believing we can do $500,000. And I'm like, okay, so what do you know that I don't know? I mean, maybe you've had bad pizza, or maybe you know something. So maybe, or like this church I'm working with in Illinois, that on paper, I said they could raise $750,000. It's a new church, fairly young, probably 4 or 5 years in existence. I said, I think you can do about $750,000 for a specific project. But what I didn't know is they have a young guy in their church that had this little company that he just sold to a Japanese company, and it has to do with self-driving cars and his technology. And he sold his company for $100 million. And he called the pastor and says, we want to do, and I'm quoting, something epic as a gift. Well, guess what, dude? That's not in the analysis. I mean, that's cool. That's cool stuff. But on average, what does God do with a church this size? So not the lightning bolt strikes or something you know about somebody, but just look on average and see what that piece looks like. And here's what I look for. I'm looking, and you can do this for yourselves. And I'll, in a minute, I'm not forgetting you guys that haven't launched yet. We'll get into stuff that has to do a lot with the pre-launch. But this is stuff you'll still need as soon as you open. When I planted in Seattle, I had $85,000 to start up, $85,000. By my 3rd week of public worship, I had spent it all. I was a drunken sailor, man. I can spend money. So from that point on, it's like, okay, you know, what do I do? Just because new people come show up at your school or theater doesn't mean they want to give you anything. So what do I do? Here's some statistics for you. I'm not a stat guy, but I hire them. Statistics. In the average church in America, and remember, I've done 4,000 of these analysis. In the average church in America, 45% of the people that give you money give you less than $200 in a year. So when you launch and you have 321 people at your launch service and you jump up and down, half of those people don't give. Collectively, that 45% that gives less than $200 in a year, collectively, that amounts to 1.5% of the income for that church. So it is not a stretch to say half of your people don't give or give less than 1.5% of the total income. Now that's okay. You know, Hybels said it's a safe place to hear a dangerous message. I know it's dangerous for me to quote Hybels, but anyway. Hybels said it's a safe place to hear a dangerous message. We are the only club that exists for non-members, so please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. And if I show up at a church and they've got a real low percentage of people under that line, so in other words, they have, instead of 45% giving less than $200 in a year, maybe they only have like 15%. That means it's a stagnant, dead church. That does not mean it's healthy. That does not mean it's alive. So when you sit down with your leadership and do your numbers, you don't sit and say, oh crap, we've got a bunch of deadbeats. No, that's where they start. So when I come and start attending your church for the first time, my neighbor invites me, I think it's cool, I come back. I don't give to you for 12 to 18 months. And if you take into the context that in America, people move a lot, that means you're always behind the 8 ball. And here's the reason I hammer on this piece. And this is what as a church planner, I did not know at the time. I wish I'd known. Is you cannot outgrow money problems. You can grow rapidly. I've got clients that grow rapidly. I've been blessed to be part of church plants that grew rapidly, but that doesn't mean it solves your problem. So what happens? Let's say, and I use my example just because it's me and I knew what I did. We were blessed. I was a good marketer. We had a lot of people show up our first week. So by the end of our first month in existence, we had 1,000 people. But we had crappy money. They didn't come give them money. Matter of fact, they looked around, thought it's big, it probably doesn't need money. So you have to understand that if I grow from 300 to 500, I'm going to need more staffing. It will impact my programming. It will impact my facilities. But unless I have an intentional plan of generosity, I will not solve any of my problems. Now, I am big into looking at church plants as like you're feeding the machine. Those first 5 years of existence as a church, you're like, I'm investing as an angel investor, and I see great potential in you. And so I say, okay, Uber's losing money, but I think it's going to make money. So it spends more on the front end. I get that. But if you don't have an intentional plan, and when we wrote our book, it was purely about this. If you don't have an intentional plan, what I find is a lot of guys die on the side of the road. Great ideas, great vision die on the side of the road for lack of fuel. So leadership casts vision, generosity fuels vision. Got to have catchphrases. If I was brave, I'd make them tattoos, but that would hurt. So don't do that. See, that's why I couldn't be a church planner today, is because I don't have tattoos. You know, we didn't have those back there, and spiky hair. I don't even have hair, so I wouldn't work. Okay, here's the deal. When you look at it, so if you're already, once you get up and running, you look at your giving, see this kind of the blameless autopsy. How many of my people give less than $200 a year? How many of my people give between 200 and 1,000? Here's the breakdown: 200 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, 5 to 10,000, 10,000 plus. Those are the same four categories for Joel Osteen, largest church attendance in the United States, all the way down. So how many below 200, 200 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, 5 to 10,000, 10,000 plus. And once you look at that, you're trying to figure out, okay, the socioeconomics and demographics of my people, where am I? Some of that will be dictated by that. Where am I? So we've got a great church in North Carolina near Fort Bragg. New church. It's called Veritas. Started by ex-Army Rangers to reach people that look like them. Lots of testosterone in that room. Very cool dudes. One of the events we did with them raising money was a bacon bar. Only at a place like that do you have bacon bars. But when you look at their numbers, they were strong in the 1,000 to 5 and the 5 to 10. That was the strong areas. 10 plus was very, very, very weak. Didn't represent who they were. That's not who's there. Next thing, and this is a scary one. In the average church in the United States, when you look to see who gave them money in 2018, you know, we're just finished the year, who gave them 18, and compare it to who gave them money in 2017, the year before, you'll find 18 to 20% were replaced. So you had a churn, and that's one of the words I always use, what's your churn rate? You had a churn of 18 to 20% of your givers. So 1 out of 5 of your givers leaves every year and is replaced by somebody else. And what do we know? New people that come give it a lower level and grow into that through maturation. So you're constantly replacing givers with people that give less. Have I totally depressed you? No, it's very exciting, very exciting. The cool part about this, everything I try to teach and everything I talk about works in the poorest of poor environments to the richest of rich environments. It's not dependent on socioeconomics. So the Greenwich, Connecticut, where I have like a church of 310 people give over $1 million to the project. Why? It's Greenwich, Connecticut. It's a wacky world. Brownsville, Texas, where I've got a guy that's got 2 locations, one in Brownsville and one across the line in Mexico. And he preaches at one, drives his car to Mexico, and preaches second service over there. Well, both sides are poor as snot. I mean, Brownsville's not only a place where you're poor, you carry 2 guns because one's not enough. I mean, it's a tough spot. Just as successful using the same practicality, the same organizational piece. So first, when you're doing that blameless autopsy, you're looking and say, okay, I always want to say every year, look at my giving. Where am I? Where am I strong? Where am I weak? And I'm looking to see when I lose a unit, Am I losing them from the top two categories or the bottom two? If I'm going to churn at a high rate, because I've had churches churn at 40% a year, but still grow. So if I'm going to churn at a high rate, I expect my churn to be in that 200 to 1,000 room, the 1,000 to 5,000, because they're the least attached to me so far. That's okay. If I'm churning at the top two groups, then I'm supposed to ask my question, the law of the second question. Is that because of something going on in my community? Maybe it's an area that's middle management and people move in and move out a lot. Or is it an upheaval within the vision and direction of my church? Because that's when those folks leave. So it's not just important to know what churn rate is, how churn rate affects me, but where those people are coming from and where they're leaving. Okay? Clear as mud so far. All right, cool. All right. I'm going to hit random things and then get down into the weeds. When you are trying to raise money, and this will work on the pre-launch and post-launch. When you're trying to raise money, you're effectively vision casting, you're trying to share information, but you're doing that in 3 different rooms. And you're always trying to examine, say, how good am I in my 3 rooms? My first room is the big room. So if you've already launched, then on weekends, when you're worshiping together, that's big room conversation. So in big room conversation, money time, what am I talking about? In that room, it's all about inspiration and motivation. And I'm trying to get people to give for the first time. Have you ever watched the commercials late at night where they're raising money for the little dogs that they found abandoned? They're sitting in the little kennels and everybody looks pitiful.
Hmm.
I hate those commercials.
SPCA with Lachlan.
Yeah, and I hate this. I mean, I love little dogs, and I hate them. And one of the reasons is I know because most commercials are 30 or 60 seconds, and those are 2 minutes. And it's late at night, and it's cheaper to run the commercial, but it just drags on. But what I'm pointing out, they consider that their big room. That's why they're trying to get very small gifts. They're trying to get you, hey, will you do $19 a month or whatever, some kind of an entry level month. If I have in my Billy Graham life, we bought TV time for things. And in the TV world, you're trying to get what's my return on investment, my ROI. And you could not pay for national TV commercials on $19 gifts. That would not compute. What they're trying to do is they're buying names. So if they have 100,000 people respond, then it's how well do they communicate with those 100,000 people going forward. That's how they actually judge their return on investment. It's the cost of the name. Now, in the weekends, in your big room, it's the least effective for deep communication. It's the most effective for inspiration, motivation. So I'm trying to engage people to do something for the first time. You're always trying to get, when you're talking to your people, I'll get back to the 3 rooms I haven't forgot about. But you're always trying to get people to do one of 3 things. First is I'm trying to win, W-I-N. I'm trying to win a gift. I want to get you to give for the very first time. What's my communication? And how am I judging success by that? By how many people did it for the first time. Second, I'm communicating with a group that I'm already talking to, saying, how can I lift them? If the guy that had already raised, I can't see your name. Is it Jason? I can't read it. It's too small. That you already raised money and you're getting ready to go back for a second round.
Jaron.
Okay. Jaron?
Yep.
All right, cool. I don't want to butcher your name. I butcher everybody's name. At least it's not like, Czechoslovakian or something. So, but if you're going to look at the people that already gave you money in the past, the people that are most likely to give you money in the future are people that gave you money in the past. It's always cheaper and easier to work with somebody that has knowledge and has bought into even a small degree than it is to win for the very first time. You do both of those. Those are both muscles that you have to develop. But on that second group, I'm trying to lift them. So if I look down and said, hey, I'll give you an example. There was my wife and I do all our year-end giving. And we just, in December sat down as a family and looked at how God's blessed us with everything we do and said, all right, this is our pool. What is it we want to give to year-end? And because of what I do for a living, I have lots of people that find my email address and ask for money. And one of them was a church planter getting ready to plant. out of Iowa. It's a unique thing, has to do with military. And we wanted to make a gift to them. Well, if he's smart, next year he'll look and says, okay, this is what Phil did. He engaged at this level. I wonder if I can get him to engage again the second year and for more. And often what you're trying to do is say, can I get them to double their gift? So if it's a small gift, $50, can I give them to $100? You know, you're proportional. So first is win. How do I win for the first time? Second is lift. How do I lift my donor? And then third is part of my communication is how do I keep my donors? So it's the care and feeding of a donor. The ones that don't stay on my list personally to give to are the ones that take my gift and then I don't hear from them forever until they need money again. Because I would like to know what my gift is doing. It's an investment. It's a spiritual investment. So please, give me an update on what results you had on the initiative, the project. So when you look at, if you're going to write fundraising letters, if you're going to set up meetings, if you're going to have small group meetings, then look and say, okay, the people in this room, the people I'm communicating with, where do they fall in those three groups? And am I communicating with them separately? Or am I trying to hit all of them in the same correspondence or whatever? Then I've got to have something in it for all of them. Does that make sense on the win, lift, and keep? All right, so go back to the rooms. So big room is my inspiration. Big room, if I'm getting pre-launch, if you're having like pre-launch big meetings, you're getting 30, 40, 50 people together. If it's a core team gathering, that's your big room. And then later when you start having weekend worship, that's your big room. Second is my medium-sized room. My medium-sized room, which I call segments. You could call them target audiences. That would work too. I call it segmentation. So my segments are looking and say, okay, what are the uniquenesses that draw people together within my church? So if I've got, first of all, statistically, because you guys live in this stuff, that the average church in America runs 90 on Sunday, and that 75% of all churches have less than 200. So that's just reality. So if you get over 200, and the reason they're that way, the reason it's 90 is because they're all related. It's almost like a family dynamic. It's an extended family. And once you get over the 200 mark, now you're broken out of the family, and you've got not just individuals, but you have clusters of individuals. You have segments of individuals. And so the better you can segment, the better you can understand who's there, the better you can communicate in what I call the medium-sized room. So the segments could be, if I was raising money for a project in my church, and I said, you know what, I've got a bunch of people that look like Phil. He's an empty nester. His son is grown. Phil in Georgia would have more time and disposable cash. What's my conversation with Phil versus my son and his wife in their 20s? So if I'm in an existing church setting, one of my segments is probably going to be young families, small kids. What do I communicate with young families, small kids when I'm raising money? They get most excited about what you spend money on, but they have the least amount to give you. So they are very program driven in their conversation. They want to know, if we raise this money, what do we do with it? And how does that impact my family? If we're buying a building, if we're getting a 24/7 location, it's a programming question. But here's the deal. The older that I get, the less I need out of the church building. So if I'm at the end zone of New Life's one of my favorite places where Sean is. I get to preach there often, and it is the coolest, 500,000 people going through their facilities, using all the athletic stuff. It is a cool story I tell all over the country. But if I was living in the DC area and going to New Life on a regular basis, my wife and I would use it very little. So if you're talking to me, then the conversation is not as much programming. It's how do we take your gift, Phil, and how do we impact the next generation? How does it help us pass the baton of faith to the next generation? If 85% of the people that accept Jesus in North America do so before they're 14 years old, then me spending money on programming in my church to help accomplish that is a great way for me to pass that baton. Make sense? So segments can be age groups. They can be actually in a new church setting, and often has to do with when I started to come. So let's say your church is 5 years or younger. Well, you're going to have like maybe multiple places that you meet. I worked with a church when we were raising money, and they were about 10, 12 years old at the time, but in their first facility that they owned. And so we actually looked back and identified who's still here that showed up when they first met at a Shoney's restaurant in a banquet room. And then who started coming when they were meeting over on Todd's Road in this little rental facility. And what we identified was almost like classes, like the freshman class, sophomore class, junior class, senior class. And when we identified it, then it helped us say, okay, that segment, who are the leaders and the influencers of that segment? Because that's who I want to make an early adopter. Remember, we're attaching leaders to vision. So if I can understand the segments, then I can ask myself, who are the leaders in that segment? Who are the vision or the individual leaders and influencers? Second, what's the biggest question that segment would have about what we're raising money for? Because I can identify based upon the segment and the influencers what some of the questions are. Because your credibility goes up when you answer questions that have not been asked. Every time you send out a communication, every time you have a cup of coffee with somebody about your church, you want to try to answer questions they have not asked you. When you answer questions they ask you, that's still great, but you can look defensive even if it's a good answer. You're like backpedal. You always want to be on the offense. So, okay, what is it going to be? So the medium-sized room segmentation, and we can go there, spend more time in if you want to later. And then this last one is the most important. It's the small room conversation. If you don't remember anything else I say, remember this part. You raise the most money from conversations in the smallest room. Most money comes from conversations in the smallest room. So if I was pre-launch, hey, tell me, raise your hands if you guys are pre-launch. I know one is. How many others? Oh, okay. So if I was because a lot of stuff I'm telling you, it'll be good stuff as soon as you launch, and it'll be really, really advantageous to you. But in the pre-launch setting, what I would try to do, you can use email, you can use Facebook, you can use all that stuff, and it's great. But the guys that I see fail or do very poorly are the ones that send lots of stuff out and wait for their phones to ring or somebody to respond. You're going to be hungry. So instead, what I'm trying to do with my mass big room conversation, because email or Facebook can be a big room conversation. So in that, what I'm trying to get is people that will raise their hand that I can talk to individually. So it's like, okay, so if I'm a church planter and I've been invited to a friend's church to speak on the weekend about this church we're going to plant somewhere, then the most important thing I want is not an honorarium. If they want to give you cash, that's cool. But the most important thing you walk away with are names to communicate with. So if I get invited to a church of 100 to talk about my church plant, that can be a gold mine. And what I'm trying to say is, you know what? If I can get 8 families to give me their information so I can follow up and talk to them, that could be worth more than that church ever gave me. Names, names, names. So I'm always building my name list, which is my big room, but I'm trying to create those opportunities for small room conversations. So sometimes, like the church I told you that we just gave money to that's out of Iowa, because I had already talked to him, so he needed to do this the right way because I had already talked to him. But he contacted me and wanted to set up a phone call. Well, because I'm in East Tennessee in the mountains and he's in Iowa, you don't want to waste money just driving somewhere or flying or whatever. So a phone call is not a bad conversation. That can be a small room conversation. You'd much rather have face-to-face if you can. But understand that in the church world, 50 to 60% of every dollar you raise comes from that small room conversation. And the first gifts you get, let's say you and I sit down over a cup of coffee, you share your vision for your church plant, and my wife Georgia and I say, we'd like to do something, and we give you a $500 check, which is a lot of money. The first gift I give you is always the smallest gift I will give you. Sometimes in church world, we think if I got a $500 out of a guy or 1,000 or 5,000, it's like, well, okay, man, that's great. I got to be cautious going back to him. Wrong answer. I've invested in you on a promise. The next time you talk to me, you have a track record. See, when you raise money right now, you guys promise to do something. I promise to launch this church. I promise to build this kind of a church. I promise to reach these kind of people. From then on, you can start building a track record. That's why it's so important how you raise money, because it's hard to overcome doing it badly. Too many guys I've had to work with that have raised money for stuff they didn't do. You know, it was just poor planning. It wasn't that they're bad guys. And so then you've got to go back and, all right, how do I clean up the broken glass before I can ask for something based upon what I did? So, but always remember the best soil are those folks that already gave you some money. Now, that doesn't mean the second time you come to me that I necessarily will give you money right away. But I want to know what's going on. I already invested in you. And you always want to give me the opportunity to participate. It's always a good chance to let me participate. But you always, in that conversation, take guilt off the table and say, hey, Phil, thank you so much for what you guys did, man. It was a really, really helpful thing to us at that particular time. And if you never give any more money, thank you. That's taking guilt off the table and lets me go on the journey further and see if there's something else we can do down the road. Make sense so far? You guys are being attentive. You haven't fallen asleep, but I don't want to waste your time. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to drill down a little bit into the small room conversation. Is that okay?
Yep.
I think it's one of the areas that gets really screwed up. And as I already put the guilt on you, it's 50 to 60 cents on every dollar you raise. So it's a biggie. First, I'll tell you how I set them up. When I build my list, and I know this is an imperfect world, and so we just got to figure it out, is when I'm building my list, especially for you pre-launch guys, I'm looking for guys that have the ability, families, individuals, churches that have the ability to make a gift over a certain threshold. So maybe in your world, you're saying, all right, I'm going to have all my one-on-ones with people that can give at least 1,000 or at least 5,000, or you come up with some number. And it's because you're trying to figure out the best use of your time. You don't have the ability to go sit with everybody that you come up with a name for, but you do want to meet with as many as possible. So you've got to start building that list. And I know that's triage because you don't know much about them, but you can make some assumptions, maybe their leadership roles in their churches, what they do for a living, those kind of things, and come up with it. And 1,000, honestly, is a very generous first-time gift to anything. So don't set it too high. But come up with that and start building your list. So the first thing that I start doing is with a guy, say, all right, how are we building your one-on-one list? The one-on-one conversation, how are we building the list? And the more you know about the people, the better you can be. You're always building it. You're always, every church you speak to, everybody you talk to, you're always building. And that list never changes. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to tell you about one-on-ones, you do for the rest of your life. You guys know Albert Tate. Have any of you heard of Albert Tate? African-American plant church out in California, speaks at Exponential and all that stuff. He's one of my clients, and we're raising money, but it's not a campaign or anything. It's just because it's a new church running thousands and they need money. It's like people don't come and giving you money. One of the first things we did with him is like, okay, we're going to identify out of like 8,000 people, who are the 100 that you need to sit down and have a cup of coffee with, and start building that the best we possibly can build it. As we go, we'll learn more. Some people will go off the list. New faces will come on the list. And how you get on the list is one of three ways. A, financial capacity. You're on the list because I think you have financial capacity. Not ashamed of that. You ask people that have the ability to make a gift. Two, you are an influencer and a leader. So maybe you've got a friend that's a senior pastor of a large church. Well, treating him as a one-on-one is good because he could be a leader and an influencer of others, not necessarily what he can write to you. So a leader and an influencer. And leaders are sometimes positional leaders, senior pastors of large churches, those are positions. Or their third is they're leaders of influence. They don't have a position, but they influence lots of people. So I'm looking to build my list, say, who are my financial leaders, my positional leaders, my leaders of influence. And this is my one-on-one list. What do I got? I think a guy should always have 50 at least. I think he's always working on a list of 50 for the rest of your life. Like I said, it doesn't say stagnant, but you're always doing it. Second is, how do I get in front of them? I send an email. Is how I do it. I don't like to do phone stuff, because if you call me to set up a meeting, I'll just say, hey, I'm busy. Why don't we just talk now? And the problem is, you'd love to have face-to-face or some set aside time where it's uninterrupted. So the best way to do that is to send them an email. So you send me an email, say, hey, Phil, man, I'd really love to tell you about some exciting stuff that we're doing and what we're getting ready to do, blah, blah, blah. And because of whatever reason, maybe you could reference somebody that we both know, whatever. In that email, if you can, and I don't know what your staffs or your volunteers look like, but if you can, I would introduce a second name. So I'll give you my company's example. So I had a church today from Omaha that reached out. And I immediately sent a text to Tim that works with me. And I said, hey, Tim, could you follow up with this guy and see what's happening in Omaha? And Tim will set up a time for me, and the two of us to talk. Tim in my world is my junkyard dog. You need somebody in your world that is tenacious and a scheduler, so that you can give them a block of time and they fill your schedule. If you're already gifted at that and you're already hitting a home run, then ignore everything I'm saying. But most church planters I work with, this is not their strong suit. They're good when you get them in the room, but they're really crappy setting it up and getting in the room. Am I making sense, or am I insulting? Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, I think one of the biggest things is, yeah, people will want to say, just, let's just talk about it now. And, this takes that out of the equation when it's not you talking.
And it takes the cold call. So let's say the guy in Iowa, which intelligently sent me an email to see if we could talk. Well, if he had just called me, he might have got me. If I'm traveling, if I'm not in an airplane or whatever, I answer my phone. So I might have answered it, but it could have been at a crappy time. I couldn't give him a lot of time. And it would have made him very uncomfortable, because then it's like a cold call. And within 90 seconds, you're trying to do an elevator speech of why you want to talk to me. So instead, if you said, hey, you know what? I'd really like to hang out with you. And I've asked Becky that works with me, and Becky is great. And she knows all my times, so that you don't have to get frustrated going back and forth. And if you can carve out 45 minutes for me, that would be great. And it introduces Becky or whoever to be the tenacious junkyard dog that chases that person back and forth, and to sit down so you can have the conversation. It may sound not that necessary, but I'm telling you, if one of the muscles you can develop, this is one of the best ones. It's huge. And that person needs to be, you need to select them based upon, they don't get disappointed. I had a friend years ago that when we were both young in our 20s, he lived next door to me, got to know him, ended up getting to baptize he and his wife. But he was a door-to-door Kirby vacuum salesman. Have you ever heard of Kirby vacuums? I mean, they cost like a used car. They're crazy. And you're like, that to me would be my idea of hell. Go door to door and sell the vacuums. This guy drove a new Cadillac, man. He was rocking. The reason is that he had that unique personality. His name, Pete O'Leary. Pete knew, he says, I know statistically I've got to knock on this number of doors to get this many conversations, and that many conversations results in this many sales. And so every time he knocked on a door and they said no, he said, cool, I'm getting down to my stats. And so if I need to knock on 8 to get 2, and I've already knocked on 6 that said no, he'd get all excited like, this is going to be great. And then if I got 2 that I talked to, is like, I know I'm going to get a sale. And he worked on it. But honestly, I know him after all these years, because I don't know very many people like him. Who likes to do that? So you as a church planter, you guys are gifted at vision casting. You love to sit down in a living room or sit over a cup of coffee and talk about what God's laid on your heart in a vision and everything like that. You get jacked up on Mountain Dew about that. But setting it up is often your Achilles heel. And I see too many guys struggle on that. So if you can do the email setup, and if you email me and ask for a sample, I'll have Tim, my guy, send you just a sample little email that we use. All right. And my email, just for easiness, is Phil, Phil, @thegivingchurch.com. Phil@thegivingchurch.com. They blocked out the time. They're going to fill up the schedule for you. You're going to allow about 45 minutes. It's an hour at the max. You don't waste everybody's time. Here's what I would not do, and I know this pre-launch is really hard, but I would not go to people's houses. The reason, if you go to somebody's house, they feel like they have to entertain you. They feel like they got to feed you. It's like a 2 or 3 hour commitment. So they're much more reluctant to say yes. And if I'm pre-launching, then I'm doing a coffee shop. If I've already got an office space, if you guys got office spaces, I would do that over a coffee shop. I would say, hey, can you come by the office? I've got a Keurig and we'll hang out. It's just a lot more, it's a lot easier to have an intimate conversation than it is in a noisy environment. Sometimes you got to, I do lots of stuff at Starbucks too. But if you've got a space that you're using for your office, that's not your house, I wouldn't bring it to my house. So anyway, they get in the room, they're getting there. Here's what I talk about. This is my 6-step process for one-on-one conversations. And honestly, it's worth the price of admission. It is tried and true. It works. It's not manipulative. It's just easy. So the first thing I do is, number one, I start with gratitude. I say, thank you for meeting with me. People are always notorious for asking for stuff without saying thank you. So I'm going to say thank you right off the bat. If you already know them, maybe they've already given you money, maybe they've come to an event, whatever, so thank them in a more focused way, but say thank you. Second, I would go right into number 2. They want to know from the time you set up the meeting, their number 1 question is, why do you want to meet with me? So number 2, we're just going to tell them why we're meeting. Hey, say, you know what? I'm launching this church. You know that, or you may be aware of that. I'm excited about it. I'm talking to lots and lots of people. You're somebody I know is an influencer and a leader, and I really just value your time and want to sit down and share some things. So they know they're not the only person you're talking to, but yet it's a valuable conversation. And I will tell you, as your church grows, face-to-face time with the lead vision caster is a commodity of value. Once your church launches, if you're not careful, the only 2 groups you know intimately are other leaders and pains in your butt. If you're not careful, that's only 2 groups you know. And the bigger the church gets, the more it's that way. So this is a group we cultivate because they don't have to be a positional leader and they don't have to be a pain in the butt. So second is, why am I meeting with you? Third, I would go into the vision of what it is you want to do. And that's where you guys are hemorrhaging extroverts and you just go crazy and say, let me tell you about why this city, why this location, why now, why me, all that stuff that you have spent a lot of time figuring out. So that's the vision of what it is you're trying to raise money for. All right. 4 is, how are you going to pay for it? The number 1 fear a high capacity giver has, and these folks are in your world are high capacity. The number 1 fear a high capacity giver has, if they're thinking about making a significant gift, is that they're the only ones that will do it. You can't do the project and their money to sit somewhere. So you have to explain your process for the intentional plan of funding this. So you can say, hey, this is what I'm doing. These are the people I'm communicating with. These are the small group environments I'm creating. These are the one-on-one talks I'm talking to. These are the other churches that are supporting us. You've got to lay out your funding plan. Pretend it's a venture capitalist meeting. We're at Silicon Valley. You're pitching me the idea of this new company, and I'm one of those people that it can invest. I want to see not only, because here's the deal. You can convince me it's a great idea, but if I don't think you can pull it off, I'm not going to give to it. Or I give way below my threshold. So this is where you've got to convince my proof of concept, my funding, how we're going to do it. And in that funding, I think you have to have some kind of sense of urgency when you want it. So if you're getting ready to launch a church and you meet with me and have a cup of coffee and say, this is my vision, we're going to launch church over here, I'm really excited about it, really love for you to be a part of that financially. When? If you're expecting me to write a check when we have coffee, that's probably not going to happen. So what's that sense of urgency? So I like a collective date. Pick a time. Maybe it's by launch date or a month before launch date or whatever it happens to be. Something. Come up with something. and say, by this date, we want to have this number of people on board, and always stress the number of people that you're talking to and how many people are going to give to it, not just how much money. So let's say you're going to raise $300,000 for a launch. I would break it down and say, we hope to have 20 churches and 150 individuals give to this. You know, come up with something. Come up with a realistic, because they can identify with being part of that team more than they can identify whatever my gift is, multiplying it out and wondering if you have that many people that'll give at that level. So give some thought to that funding plan, and have a sense of urgency. By this date, I'd really love to see you on board. And if you can, I would have something, whether it's an event that you're going to do, or if you're going to do multiple events in different cities that you're raising money in, something, if you can pull that off, a collective time where they're going to make that commitment. The number 5 is the appropriate challenge. The appropriate challenge is what we would call the ask. And I'll tell you how I coach guys to do this. There are other ways. Most people do not like asking for money, so I build on that premise that most of my pastors hate the thought of asking for money. So how do we have an appropriate challenge without feeling like we're selling them an insurance policy? And here's what I do. One is I develop a giving chart. I would develop a chart that on one side is save the date. It's the dates of your church launch, your group meetings, anything you can put on that lets me know when this thing's happening. So they can stick it on the refrigerator and pray for those dates. 2, on the other side of it, I would develop a giving chart that says, this is how much money we need to raise. Hey, real quick, all 5 of you, just tell me the amount of money you're trying to raise for launch.
500,000.
500. Man, that is cool. Where?
Winter Haven, Florida.
Winter Haven, Florida. Well, there should be people there with money.
I hope.
All right, somebody else.
150,000.
Where?
In Baltimore.
Bless your heart. In Baltimore. Are you from Baltimore originally?
No.
Okay.
No.
Is it a Baltimore is a great area that's in need, but man, it's all over the board economically.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Somebody else.
I'm still figuring it out, so I'm just going to be honest that we're working on the budget right now, which will determine it. But I'm thinking it'll be about $1 million over probably 4 years.
Okay, where?
It's in Lone Tree, Colorado.
Give me a
Just
city
outside
that
of
I've heard of.
Denver. It's a really wealthy suburb.
Really well. Cool. Have you ever heard of Ascent Community Church in Colorado Springs area?
The name rings a bell, but I don't think I know anybody there.
They're one of my clients. They're meeting in a Sam's Club. They're probably running about 1,500, about 4 years old. Really doing good. Okay, $1 million, that's quite ambitious. In a minute, I'll circle back and tell you what I think of the 4-year part. Okay, somebody else.
Yeah, I'm Jaron, and I'm in Vancouver, Canada, and shooting just below 500.
Cool. Vancouver, I lived in Everett, and I always said Vancouver is not Canada. It's Seattle #2.
Very much so. Yeah,
it's so similar in so many ways. And before 9/11, it was a whole lot easier to go back and forth between them. All right, and last.
I'm with Chris in Lone Tree, Colorado.
Oh, okay, cool deal.
Yep.
Cool deal. Well, $1 million, very, very ambitious. I'll hit on this, and then I'll get back into finishing up my small room stuff. Here's the challenge when you ask people to give over a period of time. I love asking people to give over a period of time. My favorite for church planting is 2 to 3 years. 4, you can make it happen, but here's the problem, and this is what you just have to fight against, is when you ask me to give over time, you allow my gift to be sizable, because the biggest challenge is that if I can give you $50 a month and you're going to just raise money for the next 6 months, I just don't feel like my number is very big. And I feel kind of like, man, I just don't think you're even going to miss me. But if you give me, say, 2 or 3 years, then whatever the amount I'm committing to feels significant to me, and it honestly helps me go ahead and do it. So that's a balance. The other side of that, though, is you have to have a sense of urgency. And what Americans do is Americans will take like a 4 or 5 year commitment. They'll write a number down and they won't give to it because they think they can catch up. And so when you do a longer one, which sometimes you have to, so I'm not telling you not to, but when you do a longer one, you have to really fight on the front end to get them to give their very first gift. Here's what I will tell you, and this stat will blow your mind. It should. Is that when I do a sense of urgency, so I want everybody to give by a certain date, to start this thing. If I can get you to give by that date, there is a 90% chance, better than 90, that you'll fulfill your total commitment. But if you turn in a commitment and don't give by that first date, it drops like a rock. So if you got a longer time, like 4 years, then you've got to really push hard on the front of it to get them to start the process. And it's not about how much. I don't care if it's a small, gift to start, but you got to get them started. So anyway, on the appropriate challenge, here's what I say.
Well, can I ask you a follow-up question real quick? So
Sure.
Would it make more sense to do like a 2 to 3 year commitment, and then recognizing that some commitments might end, a year into the plan or 2 years in, but then the funder, the donors that I develop a year from now, they're just which will actually end up tapering the outside support anyways. It happens differently with that.
Here, it could. Here's my 2 cents. And I will tell you, I'm an equal opportunity offender. So, listen to me like you eat fish and throw out the bones. What I would probably do, and I know you need a certain amount of money to physically do it. You maybe got staff and stuff like that. You got a certain amount of money to make it your nut. You got a certain nut that is real. But what I probably would do is say, you know what, I'm going to say, what's my realistic nut to get these doors open and start happening? And maybe that's a 24-month ask. But I'm going to have another one that probably starts about 18 months in, where I'm going to go round 2 funding. So take my venture capital thing. Most of those guys go through 2 and 3 and 4 funding cycles even before they ever do an IPO. And I know you're not a company, but I like the philosophy. So here's what I want to dispel. If I give you money to start this thing, I'm going to be very interested in making another gift later. Don't think you've gone to the well. That is not true. Statistically, it's not true. My experience, it's not true, because I've learned more about you. So in that first 24 months, tell me, Chris, when are you guys scheduled to start to actually have public meetings?
We're looking at fall 2020 right now, like the end of September.
So I probably would have okay, what gets me going? And then before I get there, I'm already starting my second round of funding that's going to carry me through the transition, because everybody shows up is not going to pay for everything. The 4 year thing, too much life happens. And you're just going to have a lot of attrition. And if you want to build it into your system, that's okay. You can make it work. But you just have to know, all right, this is not where I work real hard, get everybody make a commitment, in 4 years from now, I'll worry about it, but that won't work. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here's my appropriate challenge. So I've got the giving chart, and it breaks down the kind of gifts I'm going to need. So if you need $1 million, $500,000, $150,000, then you need to sit down and give some noodle to it and say, all right, how many gifts of $500 do you think I need? How many gifts of 1,000? How many gifts of 5,000? How many churches are going to be on board for a large gift? Figure that out and build a little pyramid that has those numbers on it, because everybody you talk to needs to be able to see there's a place for them. If you don't do that, you sit down with me and say, I need to raise $1 million. Okay. And you're talking to me and I'm like, well, I wonder how many people he can actually talk to. And is he wanting all of us to do 50,000, 20,000, 10,000? And then what I'll do is I'll self-identify and say, I can't do that, so I don't do anything. And so instead, the giving chart lets me see these are all these different kinds of gifts that he's going to need. I could be one of those because I can self-identify on there where I am socioeconomically. All right. So build the giving chart, sit down, and here's my questions. And honestly, these are the 2 things that I ask and I coach every one of my guys to do, and it works and it doesn't blow up. Is I say, for my appropriate challenge, I give them the chart and I say, here, what I'd like you to do is, will you take this chart home And between now and that date that's on the back, will you pray about making the largest gift you've ever made to ministry? I don't know what that is. That's between you and God. I don't need to know. But will you pray about it? Because I'm going to ask everybody I talk to do that. Will you pray about it? And then second, when you look at those numbers and you take it home and start praying about it, you're going to naturally gravitate to a number and ask yourself this: is that number I'm looking at my number or God's number? Because I'm asking everybody to pray about God's number for them. And here's what I know. If you'll ask those two questions along with a chart that lets me see what you really need and how it breaks down, you will have much greater success than even if you were just boldly sat across some people and asked them for certain numbers. Like, Phil, I need $5,000. You know, I'm telling you, most guys not only don't want to do it, they're bad at it, and it's not as successful. This, if you do it without the chart, you're not very successful because it doesn't let me know really where I need to be. I just do math, and then I figure out maybe I can't do that. And if you just give me the chart, but you don't challenge me, pray about making the largest gift I've ever made to ministry, and is that my number or God's numbers? Those are very challenging phrases to pray, but it doesn't get in my business about stuff you don't know. Because what you don't know, based on where some guy works, I have so many church planters that they make assumptions like, well, this guy's got this job, or this guy drives this car, he lives in this house, and that doesn't mean anything. There was a book out years ago called The Millionaire Next Door. You guys read that? Get it online. You probably buy it on Amazon for $1. The Millionaire Next Door. It's excellent. It's written by two sociologists studying wealth in America and who's really rich and all that. And what it identifies is where real money is, and it's not who you think. It's a guy with a small welding shop, not your doctor that's in debt, you know? And so don't prejudge people. You don't know where wealth is. So that's why we don't slip pieces of paper across with numbers written on them, because we don't know enough. Now, if I do, so examples, my guys in Colorado I mentioned, we had a guy in that church that I personally know. It was weird. I just happen to know. And he's a billionaire with a B. Well, I can help you. That's a number we can ask. We know it because I know he loves church plants. I know he's committed, and I know he has great capacity. So that one's one you can go say, hey, you know what? To get this off the background, could you do $1 million match? And if you prayerfully, you and your wife give $1 million, we're going to use it as an anonymous match for everybody else. Those are cool. Whenever you know something and you know you've got a large opportunity, use it as a match. It's a powerful tool. All right, I've talked nonstop forever, and I know you guys got good questions. And at this stage, I think I could be more value to you, answering some of those questions. And Mark Wright, I don't know if you know this guy, but I have a dear friend that works with me named Dave Miller that you could be his twin.
Really?
Yeah, he lives in the Denver area.
I don't know him.
I mean, it's freaky.
Yeah.
If you ended every phrase with "yeah, man,"
Yeah, man.
because that's what Miller does. All right. So, you got any questions?
Well, Phil, you I think I'm not sure if you mentioned the last step. I think it's thank you though.
Oh, I'm sorry. Number 6. See, you're. That's why we have you, Sean.
Yes.
Usually Cooper is with me and he's telling me what I forget. The last one is simply gratitude. We end with gratitude. We start with gratitude and then end with gratitude. And so that's where you thank them profusely for what they're doing. Thank them for meeting with you. You take guilt off the table by being gracious. And so churches are probably the worst nonprofits about not saying thanks.
One question. Well, I got a couple, but so I know you had mentioned if the guys can email you and Tim will send them the kind of the canned email. How vague would you encourage guys to be in terms of giving information on what the kind of meeting is all about? I know you said kind of like, you know, you don't want to, I guess, say, hey, I need to ask you for money.
Correct.
But yeah, how vague?
They're not. Yeah, I want to be vague. I don't want to give a bunch of information. I want to be vague, but because they're not stupid. So if you, first of all, this list, I'm assuming with most of you guys that there's a connection. There's somebody you can name drop. There's like, hey, Brett Andrews gave me your number and name because he thought you might be interested in what we're doing. You know, that kind of a connection. And so if it is, I just like to sit down with you and cast a little vision of what God's laid on my plate. And that really is as down as you want to get. Now, if it's totally cold, then you're going to probably have to set it up, by cold calls don't work. And if you can't name drop, if you can't tell me how you got my name, then that's probably going to be horrible anyway. Tell me this part for all 5 of you. The one-on-one stuff, I'm sure you've thought through to some degree. Do you all have one-on-one lists that you're presently working on?
Yeah, mine's about 80 people.
Fantastic.
Personal people, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Anybody not have one?
Sorry, go
How about
ahead.
you, Mark?
Just starting. Like I'm
Okay.
literally just the last month I've been reading a lot on fundraising, listening to a lot on fundraising, and going
Most of
into
them don't know what they're talking about, but that's okay. Most of them are full of crap and have never actually started or led a church, but that's okay. No, there's good stuff out there. Here's what I would tell you. You got to start somewhere. If you don't have anything, I start with what I call my Christmas card list. It's like, okay, who cares about me? Friends, family, alumni from school that I went to school with, people from past churches that I served, who cares about me? And then go out from that. The farther you get out from that, the harder it is, because you got to start from somewhere. And that's the 80s is a healthy list. That's fantastic.
I have a list of like 20.
Okay.
And the question I have, is it okay, like once I go with this list of 20, if I ask them for more names?
You can, and that's fantastic if you want to. It's kind of the insurance sale deal.
Right.
They say, hey, there are 2 friends that I can talk to about this great opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you're comfortable doing that and you want to do that, that's fine. I have not had a lot of success from guys doing that, because I'll tell you, now part of this is you just me. I know how I like to be asked. And if you ask me for that, I'm more generous personally than I am about giving you my friends.
Right.
Unless if you said, hey, you know what? It's like, because of who I know, maybe it's a part of the country that I work with Brett and New Life and Passion for Planting, and I know they're really excited about that too. And I might say, hey, you know what? I picked Brett's brain on that a little bit, because he's really been talking about that part of the country. So, I mean, there are times when I might open that door, but it's a tough one.
Something that I've discovered with the list is that there's often more people that you could put on that list than you think you could. So I started with family, close friends, friends of the family. But then I realized, wow, like I've been a part of tons of youth's lives. And so their parents, like past churches that you've worked at or organizations you volunteered in, especially, you don't have to have an advanced relationship with a lot of these people, but if they've seen that you've invested in their kids' lives and people's lives that they care about, they're likely to give. So don't count out those people as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's fantastic. And first of all, it's like if you're a car salesman and you prejudge everybody that walks on the lot, you're probably not going to do very well, because you really have no idea. So you don't prejudge people, but you got to have some kind of a way to get in the door. So like you're saying, you build out from that relationship. So there's somebody that knows somebody, or I know you from your kid or whatever. Here's a phrase I'll give you that's really important for you guys pre-launch to remember. People don't give to projects, people give to people. So this early group are going to invest in you, not because they think Baltimore needs another church. There may be some of those, but honestly, most lay people in their communities think there are too many churches. Now, most of them are dead. But so it is relationship. It is who do I know, who cares about me, and build from there. Don't, like, you got 20 to start with, then smash that 20. Don't say, well, man, when I get to 40, I'll start. No, whoever you got, start with those.
So Phil, if people, I've heard that people give to people, how does that influence the small room conversation I have with them? Like, how do I leverage the relationship?
Well, here's what I think you have to leverage. And I think you mean well by that, but I really don't want you to leverage the relationship. What I want you to do is if I'm sitting with Chris and you're talking about Colorado and what you're going to do, of course, I want you to make the case why that's a good spot. So like when I planted in Seattle 100 years ago, Snohomish County at the time was like one of the fastest growing counties in the country, but also one of the most unchurched, literally. There just weren't any bad churches. There weren't just a lot of churches, some Catholics, some Lutherans, and not a lot happened. So you make the case for the place, that's of course. But then you've got to make the case, why does Chris think he can do it? And that's when I say people give to people. Part of what I walk away with is that I'm going to invest in that dude. Like this guy that the Iowa connection is still in the military thing, I really didn't pay that much attention where he's going because I was convinced he had the ability. And you've got, so maybe it's like, hey, not only what you already have done in your track record, have you had the ability to lead and grow something? If you've been on a staff, a youth minister, those guys in Colorado I told you about were both on Ortberg's staff out in California. They had not been senior pastors. So that one was the junior high guy and one was a senior high guy, and they went as a pair to plant this church in Colorado. But they could show back in Ortberg's church in California what we did with our youth groups, the number of leaders we developed, the number of kids that we grew this thing to, the number of kids we baptized. I mean, they had a track record that said, I can build and grow something. And so you need to work on that part of your mantra is what have you ever built and grown? It doesn't necessarily, like when I got the call to go to Seattle plant, I'd already planted in Kentucky in a small environment, a rural environment. But I could say, this is what I did from the time we launched with 30 mean people, until we bought a building, sold a building, got another spot. This is what we were after 5 years. They weren't huge numbers, but it showed that I did know how to grow and build something from scratch.
Phil, I know you've been talking about the small room, but sometimes the person you want to meet in that small room has a really big capacity. Is that somebody I should try to target or just treat them like anyone else? For example, I know somebody who could fund the whole thing with one check if he wanted to.
Right.
And I have a lot of points of connection to that person through others, but I don't have a personal relationship with him myself. So
do you have anybody that's close enough to him that he would set it up and go with you?
I think so. Yeah.
I would do that.
Okay.
Now here's what I will tell you. That's called hunting for elephants. And most of us survive on rabbits and a few deers.
Right.
But every now and then you get an elephant, and that's okay, but don't go into it thinking it's going to be an elephant, because what'll happen, let's say that he gets jacked up, and I would lay money on this if I was a betting man. He gets jacked up and he makes a generous gift to you, but it's not anywhere near funding the project. It's like a 20,000 or 10,000. That's okay, because the first gift I give you is the smallest gift I give you. And that guy could end up doing something much later, much more significant, because you've got to show proof of concept. You've got to show, hey, you're an early investor, and I'm going to keep communicating with you and letting you know how others are jumping on board, and this thing's gaining momentum. And he makes a second, third, fourth gift. So just don't go into it thinking, all right, I got to come out with a 6-figure gift because this guy's got high capacity. No, the first thing you do, you don't raise money, you raise friends.
Mm.
So the first time you're trying to make a friend.
Would I be trying to, is it smart to go into that situation and just look for that first gift? Or is it wise to say, hey, will you match? Like you were saying, if you have somebody with high capacity.
I probably, and I know that we're getting down into a very particular example. So I want to answer it particular. Don't take it as a broad swath, So yeah. This is if I'm dealing with a guy that's a 6 or 7 figure potential who's not giving me anything. So what I want to do is get the very first gift. I don't care how big.
Okay.
And so I want to get because then he is giving me permission to communicate to him. and to communicate without the friend that got me in the room. Because he's handed that baton of relationship. Mm-hmm. So you got the meeting with the guy, you shared with him, he gave you $1,000 or he gave you $5,000, and that gave you permission to continue the conversation. So then my second and my third conversation, let's say he comes back and he said, man, I'm really excited about what you're doing, and say, you know what, we've gotten to know each other a little bit and I want to be bold. Would you consider making a large gift that I could use as an anonymous match? And I'd be reluctant on saying how big I want him to do it because I want him to be part of it. Here's what I do know. And I'll give you a quick story. I met with a bunch of people once. The story doesn't really matter, but the reason they were in the room is they all gave over $1 million a year away to ministries. So the reason this group was in this room is because they all gave over $1 million away. And the reason we were together is so that I could understand what they want to hear from ministries, and they could understand from me, what ministries are trying to convey to high capacity people. Okay. So it was a mutual learning society. It wasn't trying to raise money. Here's the thing that came out to me that I have used for the last 10 years is they said, we want to be treated as partners in your ministry, not donors to your ministry. Partners want information and want opportunities to speak into it if they've got any knowledge. They don't want to direct it. They don't want to tell you what to do. You're the expert. But there's a reason they have got where they are. And so their example was, before you show up with the 4-color glossy brochure that says this is everything we're going to do, why don't you sit down and just share on a napkin with me so I could speak into it? And maybe I say, you know what? I think we can go bigger and I'd like to be the first million. That's a partner in the concept, not just a donor. Now, don't take that as everybody you talk to, because that's a unique group.
Thank you.
Phil, so kind of thinking about, in a way, keeping people engaged and keeping them informed. Is there anything that you're seeing guys do in terms of following up with donors, just to keep them in the loop? Is it just an email once a month? Is it a letter? Is it a year in review sort of thing? Anything that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's kind of, don't look for a silver bullet, use lots of bullets. So most of my guys are all, as you guys, I'm sure, have social media presence, and they're using Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And that's fantastic. And so you're driving people to that. You're always driving people. Everybody you meet, what I always use the phrase is, everybody you meet should walk away and know your name and address, but your address is your electronic footprint. It's like, how do I find you? So if I want to know more about what Mark's doing in Baltimore, after sitting down and having a cup of coffee with him, I should know his email address. I should know their Facebook presence, whatever, that I can go and do that. So you're constantly refreshing that. The worst thing you can do is have a social media presence that is stagnant and never changes. So you're constantly working on that. The other is that I would practice some good practices. So with high capacity one-on-one stuff, I would communicate with them at least once a month, very briefly, like an email, that just said, hey, don't want to bug you, just want to give you some stuff. But every time I talk to them, I would tell them something new I've never told them about what we're doing that has nothing to do with asking for money. So, you might say, hey, we're excited. We just locked down where we're going to have our offices, or we just locked down where we think we're going to start meeting when we go public, or we just got an intern came on that we're really excited about. But start sharing. So when I'm that guy and I open my email, I always look forward. I've got a friend since we got a Canadian brother with us, I've got a church I helped work with a guy that planted in Nova Scotia. And every time Tim sends me an email, I open it just to see, because he's going to share something. He usually has pictures, but he's going to share something. And you want to do that. The other rule is, however that person wants to be communicated with, eventually your one-on-one, you'll start learning more about him. Like you'll say, this guy is horrible on the phone, but he loves text. It's like, okay, every so often on a Sunday with text. So treat them as individuals that you're looking through the names and about them, and not just blanket, oh, it's time to send out that mass email.
What about now, kind of thinking about your work with established churches and knowing that these guys will get there someday? Any practices in terms of, obviously, I know here at New Life, I think there's been most practice of most churches. You know, you have your year end giving statement. You know, this is what you gave last year. Oftentimes, there's a letter, kind of summarizing the year. Anything else in terms of, like, I don't know, if someone maybe gives like a sizable gift, or maybe, you know, if someone gives for the first time, are you following on some?
Yeah, there's best practices. First, I would acknowledge every first time gift. Every first time gift. I mean, if you give money to the Humane Society, they're going to say thank you. So every first time gift gets acknowledged. Most of my churches, everybody that gives $1,000 or more at one time, not as a tithe, but it's like it's a first time gift and it's $1,000, they get a personal note from the pastor. And the personal note usually says, hey, my financial secretary just said you made a generous gift to you. I'm so excited for you. But you don't even talk about how much it was or anything like that. So come up with whatever's a realistic, sizable thing. Third, every quarter, I would send an update to people that give me money. So if I'm at New Life, I'm going to church and I'm giving money, then every quarter I would like to get something that says, hey, thank you, Phil and George, the first quarter of this year, you gave X amount of dollars. Thank you so much for that generosity. And I would tell something in there I haven't heard yet. Give me a story. We just baptized 13 kids at a youth retreat. Give me some kind of a story in that quarterly update. Year end, I like to shift towards the year end thing being more of a year in report, that talks about the church as a whole, everything that's going on. So it's not just thanking me for my year end giving, my year end statement, which is good, but give me kind of a brief overview is like the excitement of everything that's happened in that year in a snapshot. Then the other thing is that here's what you've got to give some thought to is every church is different. So when I show up, I'm preaching somewhere in 2 weeks I've never been before. I don't know what Sunday's going to be like, how their services work. Not New Life, I've been there enough so I know kind of the flow and what Brendan's going to do and all that kind of stuff. But most of them I don't. But what I do know is all of them will take up money. All of them will have an offering. And so you've got 52 times a year for about 120 seconds to give focus. So what am I trying to do? Remember the big room, I'm trying to get people to give for the first time, so that's important. So if Jeremy Brown's one of my church planner guys down in Tennessee, Jackson, Tennessee, he's really good at this. When he gets up during the offering time every week, behind him on a screen, it shows the ways you can give, text to give, recurring gifts online, whatever. It's just all there. So it's very, very easy. And it's always a visual behind him. And then what I like in that 120 seconds is you invite me to support. Don't talk me out of it. Don't say, you know what, you're here visiting, we don't want your money. No, you don't want to guilt me into it, but people will follow their wallets into the kingdom. And when I show up at a church and it has an effect on my life for that hour, I am moved to participate, even if it's in a small way. So invite and say, you know what, this is how we fund our ministries. People freely give as God has blessed them. And if you'd like to, this is how you do it. So I think that's a very easy way to do it. If your church is growing like you guys are going to be, you have a lot of first-time visitors, I think the offering time is one where you've got to talk to me as a first time. So this is one time I'm always acknowledge first time and say, hey, you know what? I know we always have a bunch of people visiting for the very first time. And I want you to know that we're not trying to shake you down. This is how we finance our ministries. But I also want you to know that it's not a secret club where you have to be here for a long time to know how it works. So this is the family sitting around the kitchen table. And I'm just going to do a family little talk right now, tell you what's happening at church. And it releases me to kind of peer in. So it's like, okay, this is not Scientology. They're not going to kind of capture me. But I get to see the secrets. I get to see how this thing works. So use focus. The churches, I have a church in Delaware, a Journey Church in Delaware that I think is fantastic, that they give more time to that 120 seconds than anybody at being creative and doing some video stuff. So it's not always live, guy just talking. And they always celebrate participants. Here's what I would work into once you guys start meeting, start preaching. is at least once a month in the body of my message, just as an off the cuff, so it doesn't feel like an announcement, I would say, you know what? I just got a note that in the last month, we've had 15 families give to this ministry for the very first time. Thank you. 15 families entrusted us with finances for what we're trying to do. So get your people used to hearing numbers of people that do it. The most important number your people need to hear all the time is how many people participate in making this happen, not how much. It has nothing to do with it. If you get up and say, hey, last month we have people gave us 10,000 more than we've ever got, that doesn't mean anything to me. But if you say 15 families, I'm like, hey, maybe I was one of those, or I'd like to be one of those. So always celebrate participation.
Cool. I think, yeah, that's definitely, I guess, and I know some guys are, you know, don't want to know like the numbers and who's giving how much, but when you have like someone obviously who's, you know, the financial secretary or something that's keeping an eye
Right.
on, you know, they're able to, you know, give those numbers and you know, tell the minister, tell the lead guy, hey, you know, this person gave for the first time, or this person gave that amount of money. I love that idea. Especially, you know,
Here's, I would say this, Sean, and you've been around me so long, you know all this crap, but you can do this in a way that won't violate your DNA and it won't blow you up. But at the same time, I would caution you, if you're fearful of knowing what someone gives, here's my question. Why do we trust you to stand, quote Spurgeon, I trust you to stand behind the sacred desk, but I don't trust you to know what somebody gave? The financial secretary, who's probably a crazy lady that we deal with, she gets to know, but you don't get to know. And so then the other one is like, well, I don't want to treat people differently. And here's my challenge to you as an old church planter. You're afraid you might treat people differently because of knowledge. Well, if that's a weakness of yours, you already do it. You already treat people differently. You just treat the wrong people differently. You treat people differently based upon what you think they're doing. You know, and so it's like, yeah, if that's an issue, then wrestle with that and come out with that. But there's a way to do it without blowing up yourself on your DNA. And you don't pour over it and say, hey, this guy gave 10 grand, so I want to make sure I'm his best friend and golf with him all the time. But there are 3 leaders. When you guys launch, you're going to have 3 leaders you got to communicate with forever. And if you're not careful as church planters, you'll ignore one of them. You have positional leaders, you'll communicate with them. Influential leaders, people that lead by influence, you'll communicate with them. And financial leaders, and some of the brightest people in your church will be the financial leaders and won't take role of positions. And so I just want to make sure I treat them as leaders too.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, I love the idea of, you know, if you can get the system down of giving, of acknowledging people for the first time, that is incredible. You know, sometimes it's the widows might, you know, sometimes it's not much, but it's their attitude that they're developing and becoming more Christ-like with their finances. But then also, you know, with the gift of, you know, a certain threshold, maybe it's $1,000 or more. I think sometimes, you know, if you're going to give that, just at least acknowledgement that like, okay, it's been received, is huge.
That's one of my pet peeves, is where someone doesn't acknowledge. It's like, come on, dude. I sat down and wrote that check. Yeah. And I don't need you to suck up to me, but come on, be nice. You know, just say thank you. That's not you're not violating a sacred oath by saying thank you. I think that if we can profusely be gracious and always thanking people, that goes a long way. And here's one thing I will challenge you guys, and this came to me. When you're building your giving chart and figuring out how much money you need to raise and the different kinds of gifts, I would come up with a number of gifts that you're trying to get, and I would always talk about that, and I would celebrate that. So if you say, you know what, I need 100 gifts, or I need 50, or I need 200, whatever, if you'll chase the number of people, you will always raise the money. But if you raise the money, what you end up doing is trying to find elephants. You know, it's like, no, I want to celebrate the squirrels and the rabbits and the deers and everybody. And I want a number, and I want to share that with my team as we build our team. And we're up to 73 people that have partnered with us in ministry in this project, something. And people can identify with participation numbers.